that they're in. Now, why is it so important? Now, you already know this, okay? So I just want to get through this quickly. You already know this to be true. There are so many positive benefits of engaged employees, right? Not only are they performing more, not only are they healthier, not only are they more resilient, but it results in better outcomes for the people that we serve. And more importantly, people, productivity, and profits also increase. So you already know this. So let's move on to some things. Here comes one of the first biggest, it's a paradox, right? It's a big paradox, right? The very few people would disagree what we've just talked about. Very few people would say engagement isn't that important. But see, we have a massive problem, okay? Now, I'm not just talking about one or two think tanks. Gallup is probably leading in this area, but you all know this to be true, right? Gallup and probably 100 plus think tanks for more than a decade, okay? So I'm being light by saying it's about a decade, but it's been about 20 years. Reporting that the global engagement, that we have a problem with engagement. So that's the first paradox. We know it to be true, we know it to be important, but we have a problem with it. Here comes some honesty, right? Now, a lot of people tie the pandemic to how we're doing poorly mental health-wise. But let's be honest, here it comes. Before March 2020, disengagement and burnout hit record highs. Even when I started writing my book in 2013, I was talking with managers and employees around the world. There was a lot of them talking about this burnout. It's a thing, right? The World Health Organization and the London School of Economics, both in I think back in 2010, started to agree that this was going to be a huge problem by 2020. Well, it's 2021, right? And early in this, I think it was in the fall of last year, it doesn't really matter. I think it was in 2019, the World Health Organization called it. They said burnout and disengagement is an epidemic. It is crippling, right? And we were warned about this, right? And when the World Health Organization called it, the good numbers were getting bad, the bad numbers were getting worse, and we only have to look at anxiety and depression, like in our lives. But at work, we look at disengagement, burnout, sick leave, turnover, long-term and short-term disability. Okay, that's enough of the depressing stuff, right? But for the last decade, and some of you know this to be true, right, is that engagement has been going backwards for many. For some of us, it's flatlined. It's not getting any better. For some of us, it's gone up. It's gone up. We can admit, hey, we're doing some good stuff. We talked to some companies, but it's only gone up incrementally, right? And what we know about it, we should be making bigger strides, okay? So let's look. Pre-pandemic people priorities. So this was like before the pandemic hit. These are what most think tanks would say. I'm just having a look here, right? Communication, top of those. Communication's been at the top of the list for a long time. Engagement, productivity, culture, and talent, right? So these are pre-pandemic people priorities that companies say, this is what's important to us, right? For a while, they used to put it into three categories: communication, commitment, and culture, right? The three C's. Well, as a result of the pandemic, right, what do we have now? Well, these are the COVID or the pandemic priorities, right? You'll notice that engagement is still up there, right? Communication is still up there, but look at the two that have just hit the list, right? Mental health and resilience. These are now the things that have come onto the list. So almost, I guess what I'm getting at is pre-pandemic, we kind of felt that something was off. We knew that we weren't doing as well as we could. And now during the pandemic, it's kind of shone a light on the necessity of focusing on mental health now as an intervention for the people that we take care of, right? Now let's be, has COVID made it worse? Absolutely, right? Has the pandemic made things worse? Yes. The pandemic has amplified, right? Has amplified these things. And what we needed then is what we need now and what we need more than ever. And we're going to talk about that, right? What was important before the pandemic has become essential now, and we will continue to need that long after this storm. And I want to be clear, this is where we're going to think a little bit differently. We don't have, according to Brivia and our work, we don't have an engagement problem, okay? We don't have a motivation problem. I'm just moving my notes around here, okay? Now that might sound a bit ironic, right? But Steve just said there's a massive problem with engagement and motivation. Because one of the number one things in our trainings that we do around the world right now, when we do a list from managers in every sector, and we say, what's important to you? Motivation, keeping people motivated and keeping people engaged is often in the top 3 all the time, usually 1 and 2, but it's in the top 3. So what we're saying is we don't think we have a motivation problem, and we don't think we have an engagement problem. You might be asking, well, what kind of a problem do we have, Steve? We would say at Brivia, and with our research, we have a meaning problem. Okay, meaning, M-E-A-N-I-N-G, right? And this, my friends and esteemed colleagues, is where hope lives. And not only hope, but a crack of difference just to be able to do something different, right? A difference that's going to make a difference. So the hope is that, yes, while many of us are not doing well, like I don't want to underscore that, we are wounded, right? We are wounded. But there are people, if you see the screen, that are showing up every single day like this. Just this week, we've talked to dozens of them. Now, you may not dress like this, okay, to go to work, but you may be feeling motivated and focused, right? We've been working with many of our partners in health, like health, across Canada, in other countries, where they're in the belly of the beast. And we're talking second surge, critical care, in hospital facilities, ground zero, and there are people showing up, right? You know, that person that's optimistic when other people are pessimistic, energized when others are zapped, right? That person who's willing to help out with more and do more. Have you seen these people? I mean, you might even be these people, right? And of course you have. And this is where I want to say, you might not be feeling it now. You may not be feeling it now, but you have felt motivated in challenging times, right? Right? But you know what I'm talking about, right? The reality is that potential that you have felt, that potential that we see is in all of us. Every human being has it, right? Even if you're not feeling it in the moment, that potential is there right now. And that's what we want to talk about. Accessing and activating potential. I hear people saying leaving stakes on the table. That always made me laugh. When I entered business, I kind of laughed. I'm like, I love steak, but I don't see any stakes on the table, right? So let's not talk about research. Let's go to your experience, okay? I want you to think about, and we love this exercise, think for a moment about your greatest work experience ever. We're going to engage you in some chat and a tool right away, a poll. Think about a time you felt at work where you felt the best. You were motivated. You showed up early. You stayed late. You were firing on all cylinders, right? I want you to go back to that time. Hopefully you're living it now. And I want you to think about what were the things that made it so great? Okay, what were the things that made that time so great? Now we're going to make some really strong connections here. And a lot of people think, well, I can't do that again, or we can't have that back. Here we're going to go. We're going to share with you. This is the first things we're going to share is that we've uncovered about 15 to 20 things. We're going to share 10 of them right now that people say were happening when they experienced their greatest moment. Some of them say it's when they had shared goals with other people. Some people say it's when I had supportive leadership. I had a leader that provided supportive, helpful, meaningful leadership. Some people say, you know something, Steve, we were making a difference. We know it doesn't matter how tough it was, we were making a difference. Some people are like, you know, it's when I was clear on what was expected of me. That's when I get stuff done. I was going to use the other word, right? A big one is that people felt valued and valuable. They said, you know something, didn't matter what happened. I knew I was valued. I knew my contributions were valuable. This is a big one, right? We're going to explain why this is so big with our Getting to Better Blueprint research. Values, we were aligned with the things that were important to us. We weren't just talking about accountability, we were living it. We weren't just talking about integrity, we were living it. We had the required resources we needed, or to the extent possible. We had supportive team members. Think about your experience. Are you connecting with some of these things? Maybe you had access to professional growth. You were growing while you were in the job, right? Maybe you had the autonomy that you needed. Okay, so these are 10 of about 15 to 20 things that we call domains and meaning maximizers. But we're going to do a poll right now, and I want you to look at the poll. Chris is going to put the poll up here, right? Which two of these items contributed the most to your greatest experience? Okay, so I want you to go back to that time, right? Which one or two can you connect with? Maybe it's just one, right? Because this is really important, because we're going to try to identify what was behind that experience that made it so great. Okay. Going to give you some time to do that. Right. All right. And keep putting some questions in the questions or in the chat. Love to hear from you. Okay. Okay, so Chris is going to give you a little bit more time for that poll. Right. What's really neat about when you reflect back to your greatest moment, right, is you wonder about those things. Let's see what came up here. Wow. Felt valued and valuable, number one at 50%. Wow. Supportive leadership coming in a very close second at 38%, right? Feeling like we're making a difference. This is really cool. I mean, because hopefully you're experiencing now, those things. But what's wild about that thing to me is those aren't sometimes, even though they're not in the environment, you're not asking for a lot to feel valued, right? To feel like you're making a difference, right? Right. So this is great. So what are we going to do with this information? Well, let's keep you engaged. I want to know about your experience during that time, right? I'm going to ask you something here. Let's gauge this. These things are what some people call the pillars of productivity, right? So when you go back to your greatest moment ever, I want you to think about that time. Get it. Some of you are feeling it now. I know it. I know some of you out there, you're feeling it. How would you rate your energy? Here comes a poll right at you. How would you rate your energy at that time during your greatest moment? Would you say it was low, average, high, very high? Now you might think this is a rhetorical question, but wow, okay. High, very high. Awesome. So so energy, people talk about, right, feeling unstoppable, right? They'll talk about having high energy. They'll talk about using words like excited, right? Right. So now here you can see the polls. We have some average, 1%, 2%, but you've got high to very high energy. Okay, well, let's move on to the next poll. How would you say your focus was? How would you say your ability to focus, to be sharp, to be clear, right? To I guess, put your energy, your focus on the things that mattered most, right? Where, how would you say that was during that time, right? Okay, awesome. Because sometimes those things can vary, your energy level and your focus, those can fluctuate, right? But in that greatest moment, and for those of you that might be thinking, so we got the poll results here, we got high to very high. Awesome, we're gonna do one more. Guess which one it is gonna be? We're gonna ask you, what would you say your level of commitment was? And that means nothing else was as important. Like you were committed to the job, to the task. You were committed to that thing that you were responsible to do. Okay, right? These words are often synonymous with things like productivity, motivation, satisfaction, right? But we're talking specifically about your level of commitment. Okay. All right. So now you're viewing the poll. Again, high to very high, mostly very high. Okay. Thanks, Chris, for helping with the polls. Now, what are we going to do with this information? Why is this stuff so important? Well, I want you to go to the chat because I'm going to ask you, how would you describe that greatest moment if I popped in? If we popped in and said, hey, how's work going? So I want you to feel like, how would you describe it? So in the chat, go to the chat, and say I popped in during that time of your greatest moment experience ever. How would you describe it? What words or images come to mind that would describe that time that you felt energetic, that you were committed, that you were, okay, so we've got meaningful. Thank you, Riley. Awesome. Ron, exciting, invigorating, right? Being in the flow, fulfilling, empowering, important. Somebody just put, wow, yeah, no kidding, worth it, no kidding, has a purpose, amazing, capable. This is awesome. Thank you so much. Synergistic, I love that word, so exciting. Now, some of you are experiencing an energy right now. We'll tell you what that is when you go back to that time. You were treated fairly, you felt amazing, awesome. Here comes a very important question. You ready for this, everybody? Here comes an important question. Let's do it as a poll just to make it really significant. During your great moment, were there any challenges or stressors in the environment? So I want you to think about that for a second. During your greatest moment, were there challenges or stressors? Or was everything, were you in a utopian society, right, where there was no challenges, no stresses whatsoever? Okay, because this is going to be important, because sometimes people go, I worked at a place and people talk about not being able to get that back. Now, if you know Brivia, we talk about recreating moments by just taking threads of those moments. So we've got the poll here. So if Chris is going to share the poll just closed. Okay. So 98% of us. Okay. Why is this important? Because it's not necessarily about the challenges that we're experiencing. People talked about it was worth it. I felt valued. I was making a difference. We're going to figure out what this thing is. A point of emphasis is people describe this unstoppable, right? Feeling good to great. Your mental health was awesome. Your engagement was awesome, right? So a point that we like to emphasize here, right, is that greatest moments are emphasized by and experienced as energetic, focus, commitment. We refer to people call it motivation and engagement, right? Greatest moments have the greatest meaning. Now, if you look at the chat, look at meaning came up, fulfillment came up. So what is this? So what's the connection between meaning and motivation and engagement and all the other things that we call it? And that's the thing, we call it this thing, right? So let's make the connection, because here comes the big mic drop, right? Let's connect meaning, motivation, and engagement. Motivation, let's simplify it. We all have it, right? It comes from two places. We feel it when we're motivated and we know when we're not. Motivation comes from two places, inside of us and outside of us, okay? It comes from two places. The simplest definition for motivation is that when the inside force meets an outside source, we have a fulfilling experience. So if you look at the chat, people said, I felt valued, I was making a difference, right? I had, all that stuff is from the inside is being connected with something on the outside. What's that inside thing? Well, if you know Brivia, you might be familiar with what we call the forces of meaning and motivation. They're not only there important in those moments, but these things drive all of our behavior. When you got out of bed this morning, your needs, your values, your goals, and your strengths were in play. Now, these are 4 dimensions that are taken from my work, my research, and Brivia's research that we've picked up from the Getting to Better Blueprint. Now, you don't even have to know the dimensions to figure out what we're going to be talking about and how we can make all of this better. You don't have to know the science behind it. It's like, I don't need to know Colonel Sanders' KFC's spices and the secret recipe. I just know where to pick it up, right? So we're going to get to that. So what do we know about these forces? Well, when you had that greatest moment experience, your needs, values, goals, and strengths were in play with those things that you said were important. If you value integrity and it's happening in the environment, let's talk about this force meets a source, okay? What does Steve mean when he says a force meets a source? Well, if you look at the slide, right? When you connect those things that are on the inside, your core 4, right, to what's happening in the environment, okay? So if you look at the screen right now, a force meets a source. It's like a plug-in, right? You show up at work. If your core 4 is connection to humans, collaborating, success, and helping, there could be 1,000 of them. These are just 4. And you get into an environment where you experience interactions with other humans, where you do teamwork, where you're doing key tasks and something powerful happens. And you saw it in the chat. They're not even my words, meaningful, fulfilled, unstoppable, excited. People say it wasn't even working. Now wait, it sounds like I'm describing a utopia with no challenges. No, that's not true, right? So meaning fueled your motivation. Meaning, this is what we're getting at. Meaning has gotten us through challenging times and is going to get us through this. Now, what we're blaming before the pandemic was motivation and engagement and all this other stuff. It wasn't those things. It was a lack of meaning, right? And a meaningful experience. Now, let's make it concrete. We're not talking about a fluffy theoretical meaning. Meaning is powerful, right? We need it more than ever, right? So even though we're not going to go deep to a deep dive, let's not underestimate how powerful meaning is, right? Viktor Frankl, right? His work, he was a neurologist, psychiatrist. He wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning, Holocaust survivor. His work about meaning being the key to our survival and our ability to thrive in adverse situations was pinnacle, right? That's how he got through Auschwitz concentration camp during the Second World War, right? So it's powerful, but even our work, even what you're witnessing right now, we have connected with the Vienna Institute, the Viktor Frankl Institute of America, and working with Alex Vesely to make the links to what we're talking about now to that hashtag deep stuff and why it's so profound, but let's make it accessible. Go back to your greatest work experience, right? Those things that you picked, leadership, making a difference, autonomy, all of those things were your sources that created your force meeting a source, right? And they're there. They're there right now, right? What were the things that were getting you through, right? And here it is. The key role of HR, right, and of leaders is to help connect our people to the sources available to them so that they can have more meaning and a meaningful experience at work, right? So we don't have a motivation problem. Saying a human isn't motivated is like saying a molecule doesn't move. Most people showed up in the beginning. You're motivated right now, right? Our research and our work is showing that we don't have an engagement problem. Once again, you're here. You showed up. Some of our sessions that we've been having, we have to open up more spaces because people are so engaged to get into them, right? When people are getting up instead of giving up, right? This is it. It's meaning. When they push through, it's meaning. When they pick themselves up, they dust themselves off, it's meaning, right? It's not, and no offense to the authors here, right? But it's not grit. It's not stick-to-itiveness, right? It's not good genes, it's meaning. And here's the thing, it's with us all the time, right? That force is just not connected. So we're going to talk about how do we connect it. We're just not connected to the things that matter most, right? Remember, when a force meets a source. So let's open it up to questions. I'm going to kick it back to Chris Downey, my good friend and esteemed colleague, before we move into, well, what can we do about this?
Yeah,
Right?
this is great, Steve. And there's a question that came in early on. I think it's an important one to ask, especially given the times. How do you speak to management about the negative effects of the do more with less, prioritizing staff and the bottom line, reducing staff mindset, and encourage change? So burnout and mental health leave due to overwork have become so common, particularly in lower to mid levels. So this speaks to something we see often, that increase in short and long-term disability due to mental health issues. So how do you engage with leaders is the question.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I mean, I would encourage them not to lead with that answer. And that when our people, to know that when our people are experiencing better mental health, right? When you look at this, when we're experiencing better, when we're motivated and we have meaning in our work, we actually do a lot more, right? We do more because we can, not because we have to. And I think that's something worth thinking about, right? I also think sometimes like we have to be careful about synonymating cutbacks and innovation as a way of not improving service delivery or mental health. I mean, those things are different. I mean, if we don't have the resources to do our job, period, or we don't have enough staff, that's a real structural and operations problem, right? With that being said, when all things are equal, it's critical to know, right, that if whether we're in health and we want better patient quality, whether we want better customer service, we now know more than ever when our people are doing well, feeling well, they perform better. And I think that's a good starting point. When we can tie mental health with performance, when we can tie it with better service delivery, then we start having a conversation that we all want the same thing. Because as you see, we call it engagement, performance, call it by a different name. Call it a rose by any other name is still a rose, right? So we've got to get back to, and we've got some suggestions on how we can do that.
Sure. Yeah, that's great. And I think one of the things, I think this individual is onto something. Steve and I have had no shortage of meetings with executives. And we've often said, if they have kind of pushed back and said, we're just focused on the bottom line, then we say, take a look at your long-term disability and it doesn't take long. Even the bottom line driven executives can appreciate that improving mental health engagement, you will be more productive and more profitable as well. Another question for you here, Steve. Again, a very common one from Riley is, what if people don't know their meaning, or rather the sources of their meaning? Yeah,
that's a great question. We get that all the time, and don't be surprised that most of us don't, Riley. And that's not an insult. We work with CEOs that you read about, and you get them behind a closed door, and like, I never really thought about what I really need in this moment, or what I value, or what my strengths are. So the number one thing is pay attention to when you're excited, right? When you feel that spark, right? And ask yourself, what do I need in this moment? What value is important to me, right? What goal is being accomplished, or am I getting closer to, and what are my strengths that are being used? If you get, and you can record, this is being recorded, so you can watch that again. We coach people to find their meaning, and it doesn't take a long time. It's just we got to turn inwards and go, what do I know about this great experience I'm having, and what's happening? So what's the force, those needs, values, goals, and strengths, and what's happening in this environment that I can start going, okay, this happens when I take a good customer call. Well, what need is being met, right? So pay attention to your core four by asking yourself those questions.
Excellent, Steve. And we also have Rod joining us here and asking, how can we strengthen a message to staff when you don't have in-person meetings? Pardon me.
Yeah.
Are some things other than better communicated in one space and together?
Great question, Rod. And if that's the Rod I'm thinking of, welcome. Yeah, it's a great question. Let's first start by saying communication isn't connection, right? So whether we communicate the frequency, so we've got communication and connection. Asking people, because in person, there's a lot of out person, there's a lot of memos, emails. We encourage trying to do touch point huddles at least, once a week or once a month, whenever you can to the extent possible. But don't get caught up that, are we communicating frequently enough, right? Are we connecting frequently enough? And what does that mean? And we worked with a very big group just last week, and they're saying, ask your people, what does good communication and good connection look like at this time as a starting point? I'm surprised that some people say less is better, thanks. Like, or we need it in this way. Or are they, so go back to your people and ask them, especially during the pandemic, right? What are you feeling you need for a good communication or a good connection, right? Also, we have something coming up, a strategy that you can use that'll get you a really good idea on how to do that. I hope that was helpful, Rod. I won't know. Email us. Chris, anything else? Should we?
I think we'll carry on here.
Okay, we'll ask questions again towards the end. Okay, awesome.
Lots of time for, again, keep the questions coming in through the question section or through the chat.
Yeah. Okay, so we're talking about meaning, right? Now we feel it when it's there, but we also feel it when it's not there. And there's something we want people to be aware of. How do we know? Because we can feel when meaning is being pushed in a different direction. And what do I mean by that? Well, you know what excitement feels like and fulfillment? Well, sometimes, and these are the 5 biggest killers of morale and motivation and engagement. And here's the thing, folks, that we're learning about mental health. There's a direct correlation. The longer that we are disengaged, the more susceptible we are to mental health issues, period. So lack of recognition, this is important. Value and congruence. Right now, I'm in Ontario this week. In this city, 10,000 times today, somebody will act in a way that's out of step with the values, but they won't know about it, and it'll have an impact on their people. That's value and congruence. Poor quality leadership, it came up as the number 2 item, right? A lot of leaders don't know they're leading poorly, right? There's a difference between leaders and leadership. They want the best, but maybe their leadership could use some practice. Role confusion. Sometimes that's a killer. That actually moved up the list in the pandemic. When there's ... or question marks, it can be the straw that breaks the camel's back, right? So making sure people have clarity around their roles and what's expected of them, right? Lack of purpose, right? If you don't feel like you've got purpose, making a difference came up big in the chat, right? How do we keep our people oriented on what the major thing is that they're doing today, this week, this month? We have to be aware of the 5 killers of morale because they're happening unintentionally, right? So let me ask you folks, have you ever experienced one or more of the 5 killers of morale? So Chris has a poll for us. I'm curious about, have you ever experienced where people were behaving out of step of values? Or did you ever?
We'll use the chat for that one, Steve.
Oh, we'll use the chat one. Okay, so we don't have a poll for that one. Okay, so let me ask you, in the chat, folks, have you ever? Heck yes, we got a capital letters. Yes, yep. Okay, all right. And what's amazing, and it's not good. Yes. Okay, so everybody, to a certain extent, I think in one of our comment sessions last week, Stacy with a sad face, no kidding. And unfortunately, this is the good news about this, everyone. The 5 killers of morale are often out of people's awareness, but the impact is not, right? The simplest explanation for why these morales are called killers is because the impact of those moments have the opposite effect of meaning. So they're pushing on those powerful forces in the opposite direction, right? So this is important. Because when we experience, and this is it, right? The longer we experience this, the longer we drift, the more we get sick, right? So let's get to the good news, shall we? And thanks for participating. Remember this. When you were experiencing disengagement, now don't go back there, but when you were feeling down and poor morale, when you had lack of energy and focus, when you were, there's nothing wrong with you, right? Think about those times in those moments, right? What did you need, right? What did you need in those moments? Now, if you look at the screen, you saw these four before. Maybe that was in or out of the environment. But look at this. What about this? Maybe you needed a little bit of feedback, a little bit better alignment, right? Maybe you just needed clear expectations or a bit more appreciation. Now, they were in the environment. They were somewhere there, right? In our interviews with people, when they're doing their absolute worst and we say, well, what did you need? They say things like, it wasn't a lot, Steve. I didn't need a lot. It was just, I only needed, and we even hear, if only I, right? And it's like, my gosh, we're so close. Imagine this for a second. Imagine in one of those not so well moments, if someone had come along and said, hey, how are you doing? What if they asked you, what are the things that are going well right now, right? What are the things that are helping you? What do you need to feel better? Like, imagine if somebody came along and just asked you that. But see, let's not just think about the negative times. I'll tell you, this is the biggest conundrum right now. There are people that are firing on all cylinders and nobody knows why. So imagine if you, during your greatest moment that you thought about earlier, someone came along and said, hey, how are you doing? What's working for you? Right? What do you need to keep this going? Or what do you need a little bit more to just take your level of motivation, commitment, and focus higher? We're finding that whether it's in good moments or not so good moments, what they need is available in the environment. And most often, what they need, right, takes little time and costs nothing, and none of them require a line item in the budget. This is all good news, right? We have learned that forces of meaning exist in all of us all the time, every day. It's the primary source of all those things that we call it engagement motivation. We know right now that there are employees that are not connected to it. Just slightly missing. Remember, the force meets the source. They're unplugged, that's it. We also know that there are people connected to what's meaningful, having meaningful experiences right now at work, yet we don't know exactly what those items are, so we can't strengthen them or reinforce them. Now, we will, like some of us say we know. So let's take this question, and it's a really tough one. Think about the people we're responsible for. What gives them meaning? What aspect of their work do they find meaningful? What sources are available right now to support and sustain better engagement and overall well-being? Now, this is it. This comes from a place of love, and we struggle with this often with our HR counterparts and some of our leaders. We often think we know, but our research is showing that we don't. And there's lots of reasons for this. This is important. Sometimes we're afraid to ask. Sometimes, we're afraid that we won't be able to give them what they need. Sometimes we think we know what they need, right? Sometimes we think that through what we've been told or what we've read and training, assessments, psychometric properties, profiles. Now, those things aren't bad. I want to be very clear, right? But we have to be cautious about how we use them to inform us about what our people's experiences are. Now, here's the reality. Many of the companies we work with or we meet have stopped engagement scores altogether. That's not the answer, right? But it's not our fault. It's not, right? We've spent money, we've spent time, we've spent energy, right? And it's not moving, but it's not our fault because unintentionally and unfortunately, we've been misled by the research. And here's some of our problems. Getting into all the problems we have with engagement and engagement scores and all that kind of stuff is beyond this, but let's talk about some things that are really key to mention. Engagement is an output. It is not an input. Meaning is the input. We've been asking the wrong questions, right? Or we've had to interpret the data, which leaves us guessing and blindfolded. Most research, this is really important, right? If you've been involved in research, you'll get this. And right, the research solutions that we get after we do an engagement score, right, are often gathered from other people in other places. And then we apply them here. And if you've done engagement scores and engagement initiatives before, and no offense to the particular type, trying to action can be complex and time consuming, and action planning can be painful. It's not our fault because the helplessness, right? The feeling of being stuck is real. Stopping the surveys, though, is not the answer. Stopping asking, it cuts us off to the access of their experience of our people. So if we're going to take the best care of our people, which I saw at the beginning that we wanted to do, we must learn about their experience and what's most meaningful. And the only way to do that is to ask them, what do you need to feel better? What do you need to do better at work? And we created a tool to do just that. And we're super excited about this thing, right? We call it the M3, most meaningful measures. And we're going to open this up to questions right away. It measures what we've been talking about today, the most meaningful aspects of an employee's experience. Where, why, when, where do they experience most meaning? It's not an engagement score. Remember, engagement is an output. Meaning and meaningful experiences is the input. So the thing that we've been calling it, engagement and all this other stuff, is meaning. And through our work and research, we decided, okay, now that we know what it is, and we've been doing it for almost 20 years, let's measure it. Let's maximize it. And as we were saying, overall, people aren't doing well, right? Due to COVID, right? We were off balance before the pandemic, right? And in this crisis, it's more imperative than ever to know how our people are doing. We have to be cautious, though, about telling ourselves what they need versus what they really need from us, right? We must pause what we think we know. So it's also imperative, right, that we know what we can do. What are we already doing? Like that's the crazy thing right now, is that there are a lot of things that you are doing right, that we are doing right, that we don't even know about. So now is the best time to tune into how they're doing. What can we do to improve this experience and simultaneously strengthen the individual and team resilience, right? So how do we do that? Well, it's simple. Now, I'm sure you've heard that before. You've heard people say it's simple. It is. We ask employees to rate which parts of their work are the most meaningful. We identify where are they experiencing meaning, and then we ask what needs to happen to make it better. Now, some of you might be thinking this, and it's real. Skepticism is real, exhaustion is real, disillusion is real. You might be thinking, we don't have time or energy for this. And absolutely, we're tired, we're strapped, and our people are really taxed. We have too much on our plate, Steve. Absolutely, I get it. The M3 survey, though, is not only simple to execute once it's finished. You're going to love this part. It's quick and cost effective. It takes an average of 4 minutes for employees to complete. Okay, 4 minutes. It comes with a team report. It has 3 important areas. We find out first, where are they experiencing meaning? We call these meaning domains, and they're very specific. Based on their feedback, we identify where do we need to increase meaning? And the favorite thing, the hypothesis that we've proven, is most of it doesn't cost energy or money or time. What we were needing was just slightly off a bit. And we find out we're actually doing better in areas that we thought. So let's not spend that money on that initiative that we read about. The third thing is it comes with a manager's guide, a detailed paint by numbers that gives clear direction on immediate action steps and what the next steps look like, right? The detailed discussion guide, right? And I took some people through this the other day and they're like, wow, you're just making this really, really easy, right? And I said, well, if there's anything that takes more time without giving us energy and effectiveness back, we just shouldn't do it, right? And it walks the leader and the team together towards greater meaning, motivation, and better mental health, right? So we want you to try this thing, right? Steve, you guys know me. If anyone knows me, I'm excited. I get excited about things, right? We want you to try it. You've come this far today, right? Right? The M3, don't stop here. The M3 is different. You will know it right away. I talked about the getting to better blueprint. We want you to try this thing, right? I want you to feel what it feels like when you answer questions. And you might go, wow, that people say to us, that felt different, Steve, right? That was different when I did those questions, because those questions align with what we call the 10 dimensions of meaning. That's kind of our secret sauce. So we want you to try it. Pay attention how you feel, right? And then reach out. Do the survey, reach out, email us, give us a call, and we will show you this cool report and we'll take you through the results, right? So that's the M3, the most meaningful measure. And it does what we were hoping, right? To access and activate, to understand our employees' experience so that we can maximize performance. So I'd like to open it up to questions here, folks. Questions about motivation, questions about engagement, question about measures, question about what you heard today.
Absolutely, Steve. We do have a couple of questions that have come in for you as well, and I encourage folks to still. We do have some time here to load up the questions. And with the chat, I see Riley's comment about putting the link in the chat for the demo. Riley will make sure to send the link directly to you, so you'll be able to get and utilize that. Question that came in for you, Steve, just before you started talking about the M3, but I think it applies. There are obviously some folks aren't use the M3 today, and the question was, what can we do for our people that need it? They're in the most need immediately. What's something that we can do to help them?
Okay, in the most need, well, the quickest wins are validating and affirming their experience. So the number one thing that people say they need from their HR and their leaders right now is calm, is to be calm, that everybody stays calm is the number one thing. The next thing is to validate and affirm their experience. What the pandemic is it's an abnormal event, right? So we're having normal reactions to an abnormal event. You're going to see a lot of what we call dysregulated behavior. Some of it's annoying, some of it's aggravating. We're human, let's be honest, but it's okay. It's okay to feel this way. It's okay to not know. It's okay to feel a little bit disconnected, right? So validating and affirming, saying thank you more often. Research demonstrates you're never going to lose on that as long as it's genuine and as long as it's authentic, right? Right? Ask them how they're doing. So I think what's really important, Rod asked a question. Now, some people say, Steve, we have really short meetings. We're working with a wonderful hospital facility back home in Manitoba who've made it a priority to do what we call touch point huddles. And I want to send a shout out. I know a couple of them here. They're inspiring. And they just get together. It's not long meetings, but it's not the same old, right? It's not about drinking from a hose of communication. It's about let's connect. How are we doing, right? What's going well? What value are we going to live today or this week, right? So really taking time to connect with people. And here's one of my biggest hints, folks. Some people say, Steve, I want to ask people how they're doing, and we're on a big call and there's 50 people, and I don't want to ask how are they doing because I don't have time to listen to them and they got a long answer. Well, you can replace it with it's nice to see you, or I really like seeing you in the meeting, right? And you can accommodate a validating and appreciative response without getting into a long conversation, okay? Any other questions, folks? And thank you for asking the questions.
I think you captured it there very well, Steve. I think that the key is that you're highlighting is that it's not as complicated as it tends to. We tend to make it oftentimes, and even some of those cases. And you said something very important. I think is worth echoing to the group that even when someone's disengaged, as frustrating as that can be for us, there's nothing wrong with them.
Yeah.
And it's about connecting and maybe just to highlight that point.
Yeah, I think that's important, Chris. If people are feeling disengaged and they're not motivated, then they're just disconnected from the things that give them meaning. And I think as managers and people of HR, the number one thing we can do is just tune into what's going on for them. What are they experiencing? What do they need? What's important? And I know as a leader for a long time, I was afraid to ask because I was afraid I wasn't going to be able to help them out. And the reality was what they really wanted was not what I thought it was, right? So don't be afraid to ask your people how they're doing and what they need. And, I'm going to hand it back over to Chris. He has something really important to share with you. But I wanted to say thank you for being here, everybody. And Chris made a good point. We don't want to minimize how hard this is, right? When we say it doesn't have to be that complicated, I think one of the things we've been saying lately is, it doesn't have to be this hard, right? It doesn't have to be this hard. And we want to thank you for being here. I'm going to pass it over to Chris. He's going to share some really important information on when we can see each other again and what you can expect. So thank you very much, everybody. Have an awesome day. Chris, go ahead.
Very good. Thank you, Steve. And I'm sure there might be some questions that that you maybe didn't ask or we couldn't get to. We're going to give you a way to stay connected with us. We want to hear those questions from you even after the fact. So let me thank you, Steve. Thank you very much for your insights. As always, I spend lots of time with Steve, and I always learn through these sessions. So thank you, Steve. And thank you all for joining us. And as Steve mentioned, for being engaged in caring for your people the way that you do and taking the time out of your day today to join us for the time. We will be sending out a follow-up email to you, which will have that link. It's also in the chat as well, but we'll have the demo link. We will have the recording link for you as well, which we encourage you to share. I will tell you the intro will not be on the recording. That was my error. I didn't pick, but it starts at the good point when I handed it off to Steve. So all of the content that Steve talked about will be available on the recording. And we're also going to share with you some info on our next webinar. We want to stay connected with you. And our next webinar is called Resilience and the Truth About Change. And in that webinar, Steve's going to take some time to debunk these myths that we have about change and to share with you 4 things that we all need to develop resilience and to process through change. So we will stay connected with you. You'll see the link, the recording, and we're encouraging you to hit us up on LinkedIn and follow Brevia Consulting on LinkedIn. That's a great mechanism to stay connected with us, where you can hear about our next events and just some of these great thoughts that Steve and the rest of us put out for you. So thank you, everyone. I think we're going to give you back a few minutes in your day here. We had an extra 5 minutes in your day.
Yes, that's a gift. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Chris, too, for helping out. Have a wonderful day, everybody. It's Bell Talks today, so let's keep an eye on mental health and take care. Bye.